Hello and welcome to Compliance Culture, the podcast where we explore what it really takes to embed compliance in practice, not just on paper. I'm Lucinda Carney, CEO of Actus, and each episode will be unpacking how organisations can move beyond tick box compliance to build a culture of genuine accountability, trust, and ethical behaviour. We'll be joined by experts and leaders who are making compliance meaningful, from consumer duty and SMCR to training, performance and leadership. So if you're looking to bridge the gap between rules and real-world behaviour, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the final episode of Series 1 of the Compliance Culture podcast. I'm Lucinda Carney, you know me, and I thought it would be good to just have a little bit of a reflection back on the previous 8 episodes where I've had the privilege of speaking with a brilliant range of experts, from regulatory leaders to culture specialists and from data protection professionals to AI innovators. Who knew there was so much to compliance? Across those conversations, one thing is absolutely clear. True compliance is about people. It is about culture. It's about leadership, mindset and shared accountability, not just process and paperwork and tick boxes. So in this final solo episode, I thought it would be useful as we roll into Christmas to reflect on what we've learnt, to draw together the 3 key themes from the series and to leave you with some practical takeaways that every firm can use to build and measure a genuine culture of compliance. I hope you find it useful. So we began our journey with Keith Richards, the chair of the Financial Vulnerability Task Force, and he's also a key part of the Consumer Duty Alliance. He reminded us that consumer duty isn't a one-off project, it's a seismic shift in the way that we think or should think about customers. It's from rules to relationships. He explained that regulation is not just about new reporting requirements, it's about understanding the relationship that firms have with their customers. So it's deeper. It's about trust, ethics and human judgment. He said you can't regulate for culture, but you can regulate around it. His message was clear and inspirational. Leadership must make compliance personal. And when firms focus on empathy and fairness, good outcomes for customers are going to follow naturally. He also warned us that when compliance is treated as a checklist exercise, it risks becoming disconnected from day-to-day decisions. So we need to avoid that. So our conversation with Keith really set the tone for this series, that compliance culture starts with intent and it can be reinforced every single day in how we treat people, both customers and colleagues. Then we got practical and talked about the reality of consumer duty with Karen Shenton from Create Solutions. She's a fantastic person to work with. They're one of our partners and she's a highly experienced compliance professional who's really pragmatic, and I think that's why people value her advice so much. She was talking about how consumer duty is actually playing out 2 years on and highlighted the challenge that many firms actually face, that there's a gap between designing a solution and actually delivering the solution. She feels that many of the people she works with or the businesses that she's working with, they have frameworks and dashboards in place, but the real question is whether they're using them meaningfully. So she said that firms that she's working with are still getting to grips with evidencing good outcomes, not just stating policies. And as she put it, it's from moving from having the data to understanding what the data tells us and then doing something with it. Again, we talked about the role of leaders in this and how the best firms are treating consumer duty as an ongoing education process, not a compliance sprint. That theme of continuous improvement is one that we come back to over and over again throughout this series. Then we kind of did a little bit of a segue and we did a shared exercise, a shared episode between my sister podcast, the HR Uprising, and this one, Compliance Culture. And we had Sarah Hodgkin-Bates on, who took us into the world of data protection and employee accountability. She reminded us that compliance isn't just about consumers, it's about how we handle information internally as well. We explored how data protection overlaps with psychological safety, transparency and trust. She said something that really stuck with me and again could be a great strapline for this series. Compliance is only as strong as the culture that supports it. Again, compliance culture all over her. She feels that if people fear consequences for speaking up about mistakes, or they don't feel ownership of their role, so they don't feel that they're responsible for protecting information, then you do get this higher risk of breaches. She encouraged firms to look at compliance not as control but as care, caring for data, for people and for reputation. The idea of compliance as an act of respect rather than restriction is a really powerful reframe. Then we got on to making reporting meaningful with Robert Bell. So we turned our attention to governance and accountability, and Robert joined me to discuss building a better board report. Robert was really refreshingly direct about the pitfalls of poor reporting. He said too many firms still treat board reports or board packs as a tick box exercise, drowning senior leaders in data without clear narrative or action points. And actually that's something I found quite interesting when people are talking about consumer duty board reports, how some firms seem to be abbreviating disproportionately, and their board packs were 2 pages for a complex organisation, which is not sufficient. Then others were doing 8 or 9 pages against each of the 4 outcomes, which was overkill. So Robert was really saying that compliance teams need to think about bringing insight, not information. So the analysis of it, that so what factor. He said a good report should tell a story. Where are we strong? Where are we exposed? And what are we doing about it? We also talked about the importance of connecting board reporting to consumer duty, of course, ensuring that leadership understands not just what's happening, but why it matters. And that theme of accountability from the boardroom to the front room is at the heart of an effective compliance culture. Back to Create Solutions consultants, and we talked to Lucinda Carney about complaints handling. This really brought compliance culture to life. Linda's perspective was that complaints aren't a burden, they are a window into our culture. She said every complaint is feedback, it tells you what your culture looks like from the outside in. We explored how firms can treat complaints as learning opportunities, use them to spot patterns, train teams and drive fairness. Linda's point was that a strong complaints process isn't just about resolution, it's about reflection. So if we foster openness, firms can move from defensive reactions to proactive improvement, and that ties directly to the consumer duty's focus on good outcomes, because listening to complaints is one of the most direct ways we can prove that we care about our customers.
When it's time to report to the board, clarity is everything. But all too often, key information is scattered amongst spreadsheets, emails, and disparate systems. With Actus oversight, governance becomes effortless. Your key consumer duty metrics, status and outcomes are visualized in real-time dashboards, ready to share at the click of a button. Evidence accountability and progress without the admin headache. So when your board asks for proof, you already have it.
Then we talked to Irving Perez on episode 6. Irving's also one of the Create Solutions consultants. He was the third of the ones who joined me on this series. He provided fascinating insight into the role of appointed representatives, or ARs, in the regulatory spotlight. He helped us to unpack why the FCA has increased its focus on oversight and what that means for firms' accountability structures. His message was that compliance oversight must be active, not assumed. Irving was saying it's not enough to delegate responsibility if you're a firm with ARs. You've got to demonstrate control. And I think that's an interesting one compared to organisation having accountability within an organisation. This is at arm's length, so it's tricky. But that also resonates beyond AR frameworks. So whether it's consumer duty, training and competence, or AI governance, that same principle has to hold true. Firms need clarity, consistency and evidence of ongoing supervision. It's not enough to put things at arm's length and leave them and hope everything's going to be okay. Irving also reminded us that culture isn't just internal. It extends to your networks, your partners, third parties, and of course, appointed reps. Everyone representing your brand carries part of your compliance responsibility. Episode 7 was with Paul Whitehouse, and this was about leadership and culture, and I had to feel, for me, this was more like home ground for me, because we were exploring the human side of compliance, looking at leadership, culture, and the conditions that make people do the right thing even when no one's watching. True culture. Paul described compliance culture as a mirror. He said it reflects what leaders prioritise and how consistently those priorities are modelled. He said you can't build a culture of compliance if your leaders are exempt from it. Quite profound. We discussed the link between trust, communication and accountability, and how firms that invest in developing their leaders create the foundation for psychological safety. And of course that in turn supports innovation and compliance, because people feel confident enough to question, challenge and improve. Paul's emphasis on behavioural role modelling summed up much of what we've heard across the series, that compliance is fundamentally about behaviour and values, not just process. And then we closed Series 1 about AI, innovation and the future with John Rood. This was a fascinating and forward-looking conversation, and John helped us to explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping compliance, not just in how data is processed, but how decisions are made. He described AI governance as a new frontier for both regulators and business leaders. And I've got to say, this was quite enlightening and a bit scary. We discussed emerging frameworks like the EU AI Act and how they echo consumer duty principles, fairness, transparency and accountability. John's key point was that AI can't replace human judgment. It can augment it, but firms still need clear policies, oversight and training to ensure AI is used responsibly. He also warned that poor governance or bias in AI models could quickly become the next compliance scandal if firms aren't proactive. So he said we should embed AI governance early through defined ownership, clear documentation and ongoing human review. So let's bring it all together. What ties all 8 conversations in this first series together? Well, 3 things stand out for me: leadership, culture and visibility. First, leadership. Every guest, from Keith to Paul, reinforced that compliance culture starts at the top, and it's everyone's responsibility. Leaders set the tone through their behaviour, not memos. They demonstrate what accountability looks like, they model fairness, and they make compliance visible through their own decisions. Secondly, culture. It's that invisible thread that connects people to purpose. Whether it's protecting data, handling complaints, or managing AI, the strongest firms embed compliance into their daily rhythm, the way we do things around here. And third, visibility, because culture can't be measured by intuition alone. As we discussed with Robert Bell and others, firms need evidence, dashboards and data that make compliance measurable. Tools like Actus Oversight exist for exactly that reason, to give leaders a real-time view of how culture, accountability and consumer outcomes come together in practice, and also to associate responsibility down the organisation. So if there's one overarching message from this series, it's compliance isn't a department or a person, it's a shared mindset. When firms treat compliance as an enabler of trust rather than an obstacle, it drives better outcomes, stronger teams and more resilient businesses. And as regulations continue to evolve, whether it's consumer duty, SMCR or AI governance, the firms that thrive are going to be the ones that see compliance culture not as a cost, but as a competitive advantage. It's been such a privilege to explore these ideas with my guests across Series 1. I hope you found their insights as valuable as I have, and that they've sparked ideas for how you can strengthen your own culture of compliance. So if you'd like to learn more about how to embed measurable compliance culture in your organisation, why don't you visit actus.co.uk to explore Actus Oversight, our purpose-built compliance solution designed to make consumer duty and cultural accountability visible in real time. And don't forget to subscribe and follow us on your preferred podcast platform so that you don't miss Series 2, where we'll be diving even deeper into the intersection of compliance, leadership and behaviour. I'm Lucinda Carney. Thank you so much for listening, for joining the conversation and being part of the movement to make compliance culture real. Thanks so much for joining me today on Compliance Culture. I hope you found our discussion was practical and insightful and helps us to see how we can all play a part in embedding genuine values-led compliance. If you'd like to know more about how Actus software can support organisations with performance accountability, consumer duty and SMCR compliance, why don't you visit us on actus.co.uk? The links are in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and share the podcast, and join me next time as we continue to explore what real compliance culture looks like in action.
The FCA expects firms to evidence continuous improvement. Just meeting the requirements of the consumer duty is not enough. Actus oversight allows you to assign clear ownership for consumer duty outcomes, while tracking actions and evidencing improvements. This brings the duty to life, transforming compliance from a tick box exercise into a culture of continuous improvement.
Why don't you visit us on actus.co.uk?